What's up, guys, and welcome to Scourge of War Waterloo, episode 35, part 1. And today, this is going to be another multi-part series of videos on a very big battle. And today, we will be taking a look at La Bataille de Mont St. Jean, or the Battle of Waterloo from the French side. Now, before you guys get all excited, there's a lot of problems with this scenario. In all honesty, it's probably one of the most poorly written scenarios in the game. But what is a poorly written scenario? How do we know what's a poorly written scenario and what's a well-written scenario? Um, well, since all of these scenarios are basically scripted actions on the part of the AI, the writer of the scenario naturally has to start with a presumption or an assumption of what it is the player is going to do, and then draft his AI script based on what he thinks the player is going to do. But is presumption or assumption of what the player is going to do enough? No, not with a player like me, because you can't count on me to do what the scenario designer thinks I'm going to do. So in my view, a well-written scenario isn't just a scenario where the scenario author presupposes what the player is going to do, but instead compels the player to do what it is the scenario author wants him to do. A good example of that are the last two army scenarios we played, both of the Wavre scenarios for the Prussian and French, bridge over the river Dial and pursue the enemy. In both of those scenarios, the most optimum strategy was basically to do what the scenario author wanted us to do. In the Prussian scenario, we had to hold the river crossings and keep the French from crossing the river Dial. That's exactly what we did. And we may have used some broken tactics, but you can't lay broken tactics at the feet of the scenario writer, because these are tactics that I invented. They weren't even around. They weren't even created when he wrote the scenario. Um, but the strategy was still what the scenario author intended. As the Prussians, we held the crossings uh, and protected the river crossings from being taken by the French. That's exactly what the scenario author intended. Um, and in Pursue the Enemy, in the French scenario, we attacked the Prussians as vigorously as we could uh, to um, to capture the objectives and to inflict as many casualties on the Prussians as we could to get enough points for a major victory. Now, I came up with a system of uh, where we should be in terms of points at certain times in the scenarios and so forth. And, I certainly focused our attack not at Wavre, but at the Birches, and then we swept in behind Wavre, But these are all minor strategies in the overall scope of the fact that we did what the scenario author intended us to do. And there was really, in either one of those scenarios, there was no other viable way of winning those scenarios outside of doing what the scenario author intended us to do. He compelled us to basically do what he wanted him to do, because no other strategy was going to be effective, was going to win that scenario for us, or those scenarios. Um, so, what I consider a bad scenario is one where the scenario author doesn't do that. He just assumes you're going to do what he expects you to do, but doesn't actually do anything to compel you to do that. Uh, a good example of this is the Allied Corps scenario by Sabre, Attack and Pursue, where you play Uxbridge's Corps, and I covered that in one of the Corps videos. The exact episode escapes me, but just look in the Corps scenarios playlist on my YouTube channel, and you guys will find it. Um, and that scenario in the scenario author's mind was meant to be the cavalry repulse of Durland's corps attack after he attacked Wellington's right center. The attack on the Dutch Belgians and the kind of the center of Wellington's line in the early afternoon. That was broken up by Uxbridge's cavalry charge. Um, And there were no objectives in that scenario. All there was a point total we had to reach, and nothing to compel us to do anything remotely close to what the scenario author had in mind. And instead, all we did was use one little cavalry brigade. We waited until all of Durland's troops were up engaged with the British, and then we snuck around their flank and attacked their artillery line on the French ridge, on the main ridge that the attack launched from. Once the attack launched, there were no more troops on the line, and the guns were basically lined up like a smorgasbord. And we just captured enough to get just over 1,000 points, and then we took our cavalry and we went home. Uh, which is, in my view, a very poorly written scenario because it's um, there was nothing to compel us to do anything remotely close to what the scenario author wanted us to do, and instead we came up with our own way of winning the scenario, which was just completely out of line with reality. And you know, we got our 1,000 points, took our cavalry, went far back from the lines where we couldn't be involved in the battle for the rest of the scenario, and sat there. We already had enough points to win. This is very similar to that kind of bad writing. There is absolutely nothing in this scenario compelling me to do anything like what was either historically done in the battle or what the scenario author wants us to do. So real brief, let's just go through all the preliminaries here. So the battle is 9 hours long, and this video will be part one of the series, and we'll do the strategy session plus 1 hour of the battle, and then the remaining four videos. Four parts of the series will be 2 hours of the battle each. We command the Army of the North, less, of course, the right wing, which was with Grouchy at Wavre. The time is 11 a.m., 11:30 a.m., June 18th, 1815, and it goes till 20:30. So 9 hours. And the situation is you have spent the morning surveying the ridge to the north while waiting for ground to dry from the previous day's rains. The only enemy forces visible are some scattered infantry units and artillery along the ridge. Wellington is foolish to pick a position with his back to the woods. The opportunity to destroy him and continue north to Brussels is before us. And the mission is destroy the Allied army. Yeah, great. Destroy the Allied army. That's our mission. So let's take a look at the map down here real quick. All right, so the French troops are deployed in attack formation, basically. And here's basically the situation. The Allied army is deployed mostly behind the Mont St. Ridge here, behind La Hassant. There's a few of them up on the ridge that you can actually see lying down. And they also have a bunch of troops behind Hougoumont and some troops in Hougoumont, as well as some in the woods in front of Hougoumont. They have troops in a small amount of troops in the garden in front of La Hassant. La Hassant is unoccupied. On the right off the map here, they have Papillotte with some Dutch-Belgian troops occupying it and a couple of more Dutch-Belgian troops kind of back towards Ohain. The objectives in the scenario are crazy for a scenario of this length, given how long the scenario is. In the woods here, there's a waypoint objective that's I think you hold it for 5 minutes or something, and it's 500 points. And another one, Papillotte, is also a waypoint objective that's a one-time, I think, 500 points. Hougoumont is worth, I think, 50 points a minute. There's also an Allied right objective behind Hougoumont, which is worth 200 points a minute. There's another Allied objective on the left here, which is also worth 200 points a minute. La Hassant is worth 100 points a minute. And later on at 5 o'clock, I think 1700 hours, an objective will appear at Plassanois that is worth 200 points a minute. And we need 30,000 points for a major victory here. Now let's just do some quick math here. The only objective, we're not interested in any objective anywhere along the Allied line. We don't care about Hougoumont. We don't care about the Allied right, the Allied left, Papillotte, the woods. We don't care about any of this stuff. The only objective we care about is La Hassan. It's worth 100 points a minute. Let's do some quick math here, shall we? 100 points a minute would be 1,000 points every 10 minutes, which would be 6,000 points every hour. The scenario is 9 hours long. 6,000 minutes, 6,000 points an hour times 9 hours is 54,000 points. Someone didn't do some checking when they were assigning values to these objectives because we only need 30,000 points for a major victory. So here's what's basically going to happen. We're going to redeploy the entire army into a arrow-shaped defensive position. We're going to pull in our left flank and deploy it basically from around here up towards the area and link up with the left of Darlan's Corps at La Belle Alliance, because we're not interested in attacking any of this. So we're just going to redeploy the army and pull Ryle's Corps and basically just kind of pull them back and turn them so that they're facing more this way and deployed like this. Lobau's Corps, we already know the Prussians are coming, and we know where they're coming from. That's just part of, I mean, that's just, you can't simulate the fog of war to that degree in a game about a battle that is very, very, very well known. We know the Prussians are coming. We know where they're coming from, and we know when they're coming from because we know the history of the battle. So Lobau's Corps and a whole bunch of other troops are going to be detached to defend the Place Noire area. And we'll start with Lobau's Corps as well as the Young Guard, and we'll start to buff it from there and establish a defense in depth. Since we need a source of points, the only one we're going to take is La Hassan, and we're going to do it pretty early in the game. Probably, I think I spend the first half hour or so of the scenario redeploying Ryle's Corps and whatnot, and bringing some reshuffling some guns. But within like a half hour, I go for La Hassan. So we're going to use the same trick we used in the La Hassan Brigade scenario, the same trick we used in Count Darlan's attack. It's even easier in this scenario because this is much earlier than either of those two scenarios in terms of the actual time of day within the context of the battle. And La Hassan has not been reinforced at all. All there is these 3 little KGL units in the orchard here. There's nobody behind in the garden. There's nobody on the side of the farm. It hasn't been reinforced at all. So it's just super easy. You just do what we did in those two scenarios. Take a brigade. I think I still use Bourgeois' brigade. March out on the flank, and then just storm your way into the fort. There's nobody in there. When the KGL units, once inside the fort, you'll start shooting at the KGL units, and they will, of course, turn their backs to the French and start firing at the fort, at which case we send the other 2 battalions of Bourgeois' brigade storming into the orchard and hitting these units in the rear, and it's a complete disaster. It's the same thing that we did in Count Darlan's attack. So there, we've got our objective, and we have hours and hours and hours and hours to just suck points from it, and it's 100 points a minute. That's all you need to do. That's really all you need to do to win the scenario, because the Allies are scripted to do absolutely nothing unless you actually approach them, unless you actually engage them. If you don't, and because La Hassan is basically isolated from the rest of the Allied lines, and there's no other allies near La Hassan except for those KGL units that you're going to wipe out, they do nothing. They lie there on the ground for 9 hours, doing absolutely nothing. And this is what I mean by bad scenario writing. By scripting the Allies simply to be on hold to the last, or hold, or whatever it is the scenario author did in his scripting, which was basically nothing. And assuming that the French player is going to actually attack the Allies, and making no allocation for the fact that maybe somebody might do something a little different and maybe do something a little outside the box. It makes the scenario basically a complete joke. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm not closing the series with this scenario. This problem is not in the Allied scenario for this battle, because, of course, you play the Allies, and the French are in fact scripted to attack. You're going to get a real battle in the Allied scenario, so don't worry about that. Um, but I definitely did not want to close the series with this scenario because, as I said, it's very poorly written, and it makes no allocation or no provision for the fact that you might have a crafty player who's just not at all concerned with doing anything remotely historical. He's simply concerned with what do I have to do to win the scenario. And then, like I said, all it takes is a little math. 100 points, 6,000 points an hour, 9 hours, 54,000 points. There it is. That's not even including the fact that it's for 1,700, we're going to get the Plassenois scenario. We'll occupy that. And instead of 100 points a minute, we're going to be getting a total of 300 points a minute. So I'm not even going to, tell you guys how absurd the score is for us at the end. You will see. But the result of this, of course, is it's just not that exciting a battle. The first couple of hours, mostly what I'm doing is just redeploying the army into a more defensive posture, because the way they're initially deployed here is the way they were initially deployed historically, and this is an attack formation, and our flanks are actually, we're more of we're not concaved, we're not convex, we're concave in terms of our flanks are extended. That's not really what you want for a defensive position. So the first couple of hours, I'm largely redeploying Ryle's forces, some of Derland's forces, deploying Lobau's corps, rearranging Milhaud's cavalry, and shifting some of these other cavalry divisions around and so forth. So it isn't too exciting, but it is efficient, and that's what I've always tried to show you guys. What is the fastest, easiest, most efficient, most dependable ways to beating these scenarios? It's not my fault the scenario was written poorly. You can't lay that on me for finding a really easy way to win the scenario. That's the scenario author's fault for leaving that kind of loophole in the scenario. Frankly, I don't know how this was left in the scenario. Forgetting the fact that we use a cheap trick to take Lai Hassan, the fact of the matter is there's nothing but small little KGL units here. Even if I attacked them head on, they would be no match for even one French brigade, and they would run off, and I'd get Lai Hassan anyway. So the fact that nobody stopped to think, if he just holds that, if he captures that early and just holds that, he's going to get enough points right there. I don't lay that entirely at the fault of the scenario writer, because scenario writers can make mistakes. Anybody can. But what I want to know is who the hell was playtesting this scenario? It certainly wasn't me, because I would have found this. I think one of the problems in a game like this is your playtesters have a certain amount of confirmation bias, in that they are already wanting to play the game within the spirit of the game, meaning you don't have to convince them to try and do what was done historically. They're just going to do it anyway, because that's what they think they want to do. I mean, they're playing the game for the historical value of it. And I by no means do I suggest that you can't play the scenario and have a huge, enormous, epic battle by doing that. And I'm sure there's lots of things that the playtesters found that were relevant to that. But do you guys have, speaking of Norbsef, do you guys have no playtesters that actually go and look for bullshit? Because if you don't, I would be happy to be a playtester for the next Scourge of War game. Because if the kind of nonsense that is in this scenario is in the next game, I will find it. I guarantee you, I'll find it. So, do you want me to find it after the game comes out and put it on YouTube, or do you want me to find it before the game comes out for you guys and you have a chance to do something about it? And I'll leave it at that as far as, what could possibly happen for the next Scourge of War game. I've said before, I'm willing to do it. I'd be happy to do it. I love the game. I do want to make it more in line with history and reality. And I would prefer not to see nonsense like what you're going to see over the course of the next 9 hours with this scenario. So anyway, like I said, there's not much of a strategy session here. We're just going to use the same trick we used to take La Hassant in that we used in Counterland's attack and the La Hassant brigade scenario. It's the same thing, and that one objective alone over the course of 9 hours is going to give us way more than enough points, and none of the rest of this matters at all. The woods, Hougoumont, Papelotte, the main Allied line doesn't mean anything to us. And because we don't approach any of it, they will lie there for 9 hours taking a very long nap. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, Rob, that's cool and all, but you're basically going to be allowing the Prussians to link up with Wellington's army. And that was precisely what Napoleon was hoping to avoid by defeating the Allies quickly and then being able to deal with the Prussians. You're right. Except that even when the Prussians arrive in this scenario, the Allies don't do anything. They just keep lying there for the 9 hours. So all we have to deal with is the Prussians. We don't have to fight the Allies at all. If the Allies actually mounted an attack at the same time as the Prussians arrived on the field, well, then maybe this strategy might have some chinks in the armor. But that's not the case. The Allies just lay on their butts the entire time. And in truth, over the course of 9 hours, the artillery bombardment from both the Grand Battery as well as a lot of the batteries I'm going to bring up in here do a great degree of damage to most of the frontline troops of the Allied. We destroy most of their artillery, and we run off most of the troops that we can see on the ridge there. The Army of the North is great. They're fantastic army. The artillery is amazing. Tons of cavalry. Generally speaking, very solid troops. So the Prussian force one-on-one against the Army of the North is completely outclassed. They are absolutely no match for them. Not to mention the fact that we already know where they're coming from, what direction they're coming from, and what time they're coming. And it gives us plenty of time to set up a defense from Plassenois all the way up towards, Durland's line and, near the area around Papelotte, or kind of more towards where, I'm going to basically bend Durland's line back on itself a little bit and link up with Lobau's troops. And of course, it's just a straight ring of fortresses. It's an impregnable position, and the Prussians give it a good go. I give them credit, but they're no match. The French troop quality is far superior to theirs, and they're already, by the time they approach, and it looks less like a flank attack and more like they're trying to storm the beach at Normandy. It's just an impossible defense to break that we're going to set up. So yeah, that's basically it for the strategy session, guys. Like I said, the scenario has a lot of problems. It's why I'm not closing the series with this version. We're going to close with the Allied version, which is much more along the lines of what you would expect to see in a Battle of Waterloo, because we are on the Allied army is on the defensive, and it's the French who are actually scripted to attack. And of course, when they're scripted to attack, you have no choice but to defend. So it will look a lot better in the Allied scenario. All right, let's roll the video forward here. All right, and it says, you command the entire French army for the entire Battle of Waterloo. There are objectives along the Allied line that represent the historical attack points, but the plan of attack is completely up to you. That was kind of the mistake, because he didn't stop to think, what if the plan of attack is really nothing at all, and then you just sit there racking up points from one objective for 9 hours? I don't know how that was missed. I really don't. Will you follow the historic course and begin the battle at Hougoumont, or will you plan your own attack and try and change history? Events should unfold as they did historically, but with a few possible surprises. And we command 8 corps of approximately 100,000 men. It's really more like 80,000 men. I don't quite know where they came up with this number. It's not 8 corps either. It's like 6 corps. I don't know where they're getting this number. They may be including Grouchy's troops in this order of battle, but they're not in the battle, so I wouldn't have included them. All right, so down we go. Again, we need 30,000 points for a major victory. And it says expect lower frame rates towards the end of the scenario with all the forces engaged. And what they're basically saying is that if you fight a huge epic battle and there's basically fighting all over the field, um, even the fastest of computers might experience some stutter or lag. Uh, of course, that's not going to be the case with this scenario because there's actually very little fighting done throughout the scenario because of how poorly written it was. All right. So let's rock and roll here. All right, so here we are. We are Napoleon. We have, like I said, 77,000 troops. And it says, Votre Majesty, your dispatch to Grouchy ordering him to hurry and join the main army has been sent. The infantry is in good spirits and is ready to attack on your orders. Bonne chance, Votre Majesty, from Marshal Soult, the Chief of Staff of the Army of the North. And once again, all of our officers are on take charge from AI. All right. So, the first thing we're going to start to do here is just, I think, shift some guns around. And you can't see it, but the only troops are some small, you can see a couple of them, I think, some small detachments of the King's German Legion in the Orchid. La Hassan is unoccupied. There's nobody in the garden back here. There's nobody on the side of the fort. Basically, all there is are these 3 little KGL units. And I'm going to start slowly shifting Ryle's Corps forward towards the La Hassan area, and then redeploying all this, because this is set up as an attack reserve right now, and we need to send them over to Plassanois. And the biggest thing here really is just doing supply wagon runs and keeping your guns firing throughout the whole battle. The French artillery in this battle is just whoa. It's spectacular. Just the sheer you're never going to want for cannon in this scenario. Anytime you need a cannon battery for an artillery battery for something, there's one there. There's one somewhere. It's everywhere. So the artillery actually inflicts a decent amount of casualties. I mean, over the course of 9 hours, it's a lot. So right now we're working with Bachelor's division of Ryle's Corps, and as I said, we're advancing them and kind of turning them at an angle. After we do that, we'll start sidling the rest of Ryle's Corps back away from the Hougoumont area. And we also need to clear some space behind the main ridge here. So we're going to have to shuffle Milhaud's cavalry around temporarily, just so that when we have troops crossing this area, they're not kind of in the way. And luckily, this ridge here, this is a pretty high ridge. Any troops you hide back here, anywhere back here, are completely can't really be seen by the Allies, so they can't be shot at by artillery or anything. So this whole area back behind this gun line right here is like totally safe. You could do anything back here, and it's not going to get your troops shot up or anything, because the gun line is really the only thing visible to the Allies. Now, because of how boring the scenario is, I'll be honest. I had my other computer here. I was watching a movie, so while I was playing the scenario, because this is really just pretty routine stuff to me. So I was kind of only half paying attention to it. So I don't move at an especially rapid pace here. I have so much time. It's just hours and hours and hours to do what I want that before the Prussians show up. I know the British aren't going to do anything. So I have hours and hours to do what I want to do until before the Prussians show up. So I'm not inclined to really like rush myself, you know. You know, really all you're going to see, you know, for the first couple of hours of this battle is just me shifting troops, redeploying troops to other parts of the field, and setting the army up in a defensive posture with interior lines with its flanks pulled in, as opposed to the way it's set up here, which is much more of an attack formation. And again, this is part one of this series. We will do 1 hour of the battle, and then we'll stop at 12:30. Here we are at Place Noir. Just scoping out the ground here. Thinking about how I want to set up my defense. I mean, I already kind of know. Done it before. And I think we're going to send Lobau here over to Place Noir, and I'm just going to send the whole corps over there in column by division. That's the only formation you can use for an entire corps. But let's get them over there first, and then I'll worry later about actually setting up the defensive position. So here's Lobau, and we want to send him over to Place Noir, which is the other way. I was looking towards Mont there. So there's the Place Noir church. So we'll set up kind of somewhere halfway between Derland's line and the church there, and then we'll spread out the corps later and set up an actual defense position. But I'm just going to bring them over there for now. Just get them all moving over there. And there they go. And on the top left there, you can see the Imperial Guard, who will basically act as our reserve. And later on, the chasseurs will occupy the objective for Place Noir. And then what I'll do is slowly start to shift Ryle's corps back and up and link them up with this line that I just set up over here. And we'll slowly start to shift the line back this way and pull all these troops up here away from Hougoumont in the woods and whatnot. And the Allies will simply let us do all of this unmolested, because they're just scripted to hold their position unless they're engaged. Now, the Prussians are at least scripted to attack, so you will see some action over the course of this battle. But the Prussians alone are no match for the Army of the North. They're not even close. And, you know, especially a basically fresh Army of the North that hasn't even been engaged. And even now, while we're just redeploying the army and whatnot, we're earning points. Believe me, we're earning points. the French artillery is racking them up. So even though we don't have La Hassant yet, we will get it. And we're earning points anyway because we're inflicting casualties. Way more casualties than the Allies are inflicting on us, that's for sure. And Jacquinot's cavalry is serving absolutely no purpose in the woods over there. We're going to pull them back, and just for now, we'll set them up as a flank guard. Later on, I will shift them over to Plassenois to engage the Prussian cavalry as the Prussians approach, because their approach leads with cavalry, and by actually attacking them with Jacquinot's division, we can disrupt their approach and keep them from bringing their artillery close. So here's the Imperial Guard. We have the Young Guard here, the Chasseurs here, the Grenadiers here, and the Imperial Guard Artillery Reserve. A whole bunch of guns. So we're going to grab the Young Guard, and they will be in charge of this sector here. Although I believe I deploy them further back at first, and then later on I'll figure out how I want to place them. I just want to get them over in this general area first. That's how I basically go about setting up lines or setting up defensive positions, especially when you're dealing with an army of this size. The first thing I do is just grab the troops and just use the stock formations in the game to get them, you know, in the general area of where I want them to be. And then I do that for the whole army, and then later on I'll go back once the troops are kind of in the areas I want them to be, and then I'll start to more specifically deploy them the way I want them to be. But for now, I'm basically just using all the stock formations that are in the toolbar here to move large bodies of troops to where I want them to be. So I'm kind of just shifting Ryle's Corps over brigade by brigade. And what we'll do is we'll eventually just slide all these troops that are out on the extreme left, Kellerman's cavalry and who's that? Bonaparte's division, I think, is on the extreme left there, and we'll start to just bring them all back and basically pull in our flanks and establish the army in more of a defensive formation. And one of the things that does is when we have our lines bent back like this in kind of an arrow shape, it enables me to shift forces very quickly from either one side of the field to another because they have very, very interior lines. Which is kind of what I'm going to set up for here. And again, the Allies are just going to let me do it. They don't do anything unless you approach them. Really a simplistic way to script a scenario of this size and complexity. It only works if you know, the French player does exactly what you want him to do, which was attack the Allies as was done historically. That would be great if that was the only way to win the scenario, but having the ability to, I mean, a hallmark of bad scenario writing, in my opinion, is the ability to win without having to engage the enemy virtually at all. I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that, in my opinion, and that's exactly what the scenario is. We're able to accrue tremendous amounts of points without ever engaging the Allies. Now you can just see this artillery everywhere. The amount of guns the French army has is just crazy. And so I'm going to shift that cavalry division up so that I can pull this other cavalry division and kind of put them where they were, and we can start. They're basically going to be set up in reserve behind the infantry lines. None of this matters. These units never get engaged. The Allies never do anything. These Allies in the woods, we're gonna kill them all just with artillery fire. You know, over the course of a couple hours, there won't be anything left of them. And you can see the 6th Corps heading over towards Place Noir. Our cavalry division that we moving back to be our reserve behind the Young Guard are moving, and you can see the Young Guard moving as well. There they go. So we're moving a huge force over to the Place Noir area, and we're not even remotely close to done. We are going to turn this whole area all the way across this line right here is going to become like the Fortress of Frickin' Solitude. Lobau's Corps will basically be the center of that line, while some troops of Derland's Corps that are currently on the extreme right will be pulled back to lengthen that line further. We'll bring some troops from Ryle's Corps over as backup. We'll bring a lot of cavalry over as backup, and in reserve, should things go horribly wrong, which is absolutely impossible. But if for some reason something tragic happened, we will still have the old guard, nearly 10,000 troops, back here as our total reserve. But that never happens. Nothing even remotely close to that happens. All right, so we have this whole gun line here is the artillery reserve of the Imperial Guard, and like I said, just guns everywhere. So many guns that you're actually able to set up a line of fortresses where it is literally just square, battery, square, battery, square, battery, square, battery, and the whole line is just bristling with artillery. I mean, it's unapproachable. So as I said, now we're going to bring this cavalry division and bring them kind of back to where this cavalry division was, in the ground they're vacating. And like I said, we're just pulling in our flanks just to set ourselves up in a more defensive position. You know, and none of this over here is probably even necessary, because as I said, the Allies are not scripted to do anything unless you engage them. So even just sitting here doesn't constitute engaging them, because they're all the way back here. So it's much less about actually pulling away from the Allies as it is more about giving myself the flexibility of having interior lines and being able to pull forces from one side to send them to another side. It's not really so much about, oh, let me run away from the Allies. You know, the Allies, even if I left my army left deployed as they are now, it wouldn't have done anything. The Allies would still just lay there for 9 hours unless I got near them. That's basically how hold to the last work. They just sit there until somebody comes to within engage distance of them. So yeah, one by one, brigade by brigade, division by division, we're just pulling our lines back away from the woods and the Hugomont area. and just kind of linking up with Derland's line near La Belle Alliance. And Lobau's corps has mostly made it into position. There he is. And you see we already have a ton of batteries here. And I'm just shifting them a little bit over. To the whole corps, I'm just moving them a little bit over because I want them to be able to deploy in the open and not kind of in this area around the church, which is actually kind of tough to maneuver in. And we got our cavalry, we got the young guard, more artillery here, more artillery there. There's just artillery everywhere. And I think this was just a facing adjustment. Like I said, these are all just stock formations in the toolbar that I'm using right now. I haven't actually deployed them in any meaningful way. Right now I'm just dealing with moving large bodies of troops to different areas of the battlefield. So I don't really care about the actual formation. I just want to get them to the area I'm trying to move them to, and I'll worry about the more detailed aspects of their deployment later on. And like I said, I know I'm not moving that fast, guys. Like I said, I was watching Gettysburg at the same time I was playing this, so I'm half paying attention to the movie and I'm half playing the game here. It doesn't require all my attention to do this. And I probably would have gone stir crazy trying to give this all my attention because it's really just pretty thoughtless. This is stuff I've done before. So I think we're only a few minutes away here from the advance on La Hassant to actually capture that. And with that in mind, I will go head to the fridge, get my drink before that assault begins. I'll be right back, fellas. Alright guys, I am back. I see we're still continuing our redeployment of Ryle's corps here. Looks like it's almost done. Pretty much just have to get the artillery out of there and then Kellerman's cavalry, and that will pretty much put an end to the redeployment of Ryle's corps, and we can get to the attack on La Hassant. So Rob, why didn't you go and attack La Hassant right out of the gate so you can get as many points as possible from the objective? Because it's not really necessary. I said, what is it? 6,000 points an hour for 9 hours would be 54,000 points. Yeah, but we only need 30,000 points for a major victory. So, like I said, there's no rush. What's the difference if I capture it a half hour later? It doesn't make any difference. It's still going to be over 50,000 points just for that objective. Now, some of you are probably already thinking, okay, Rob, I can see this is how this is going to work, and that it's going to work, but I feel like you're missing the point by doing this. And yeah, that's probably true. I probably am missing the point. But in some regards, it isn't just about showing you guys what the absolute easiest way to beat a scenario is. I mean, that's certainly what I'm doing here. But I want to expose this stuff. I want it to be known that this kind of nonsense is actually in the game, and that the scenarios can be won. You know, at least there's quite a few of them. I mean, there's scenarios that are well written, but there's also a lot of scenarios that just aren't well written, and that obviously weren't play tested for this kind of stuff. And I want to expose that, not to insult the team that designed the game. I have nothing but respect for Northsoft, and I think they worked under hellish conditions to get this game out the way Matrix Games wanted it. I believe Matrix Games was very heavy-handed with their dealings with Northsoft in terms of forcing them to redesign the UI when it wasn't necessary. There was nothing wrong with the Gettysburg UI, and as far as I know, everybody loved it. The absolute ridiculous deadline of trying to get this game out by the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo. I mean, were they more concerned with that than actually making sure Northsoft had enough time to kick out a quality game? They didn't get to refine the AI for Napoleonics anywhere near to the degree that they wanted to. And so what we're ultimately left with is an AI that was basically designed for a Civil War engine and a Civil War game with some Napoleonics tacked onto it, but it didn't get a chance to be refined the way it wanted to, the way they wanted to do it. Part of the reason I'm doing this too is I just want it to be known that this kind of nonsense is in the game, and that, when they do the next Scourge of War, you guys really need to play test some of these scenarios better. Like I said, I'd be willing to do it. I'm great at finding this kind of nonsense. I really am. It's what I do. And just like I hold nothing back in the series, I would hold nothing back in trying to find, the nonsense, if it exists, in the next game. And, then we could get it out of the game, before it was actually released. So yeah, that's part of my reason for doing it too. But really, the heart and soul of the series has always been about showing you guys the most efficient, the most dependable, and the most repeatable strategies for beating every scenario in the game. And this is definitely it. If you want to have a big epic Battle of Waterloo as the French, you don't need me for that. You guys already know basically everything about this game that I do. I've already poured everything that I know into the series. If you guys have watched the series from the beginning, if you guys have watched all the brigade scenarios, all the division scenarios, all the corps scenarios, the Grog Toolbar Demystified series, everything that I've poured into this channel, you guys, I've poured it all. I've held nothing back. I've left nothing out. You guys know everything I know, so you don't need me. If you guys want to fight the Battle of Waterloo as the French and go at it in a historical fashion, you don't need me to guide you on that. You guys can do that on your own. I don't even know especially great amount about the Battle of Waterloo. There are people that I have talked to that I'm just amazed. This guy Ditz that I talked to on some forums. Guy's like a freaking human encyclopedia of Napoleonic tactical doctrine. I mean, he could tell you what kind of socks Marshal Ney was wearing, on the day of the battle. I mean, he knows like everything, and I'm amazed every time he opens his mouth at the stuff I learn. It's not necessarily about me knowing about that much about the historical battle. I know the game. That's what I know. I know the mechanics. I know the engine. I know how the game works. And that's what I've poured into the series for you guys. So, like I said, if you guys want to fight the scenario kind of the way the scenario author intended, and actually attack the Allies as the French, at this point in the series, especially for you guys that have been watching for a long time, I just don't think you need my guidance to do something like that anymore. You know, you guys should at this point know what I know about how the game works. And, you know, at this point, I'm just showing you really what I consider to be the easiest and the most efficient, you know, the best ways to win the battle, regardless of necessarily whether it's historically accurate or not. It's just easy. It's just easy to do it this way. You know, like I said, I was watching a movie through half of the scenario, and not really even really paying attention too much. I mean, it doesn't get much easier than that. You know, believe me, I've played the scenario conventionally. You know, I didn't discover this the first time I played this scenario, believe me. So yeah, I've played the scenario conventionally many times. You know, I've won it, I've lost it. You know, it's like everybody else. You know, and if that's what you want to do, and want to have that big epic battle of Waterloo, you know, like I said, you guys don't need me for that. You're going to see it anyway when we play the Allied side, which is why I'm doing the Allied side last. You know, but this is just something, you know, obviously, like I said, I want to show you guys the best and easiest, most efficient strategies to use, but at the same time, you know, I want Norbsoft to see this and go, wow, how did we let this happen? You know, because I would like to not see it in future Scourge of War games. And like I said, make me a playtester and I'll find this stuff for you guys and make sure it never gets out to the public. You know, and in a way, it's like, I'm amazed no one else ever thought of this, to be honest. I mean, it's so simple. It's simple math. One of these objectives, all you have to do is do a little bit of multiplication, and you realize that's all you need. You know, it's just the Lai Hassan objective alone will do it. Even if there wasn't an objective at Plassanois, it still would be enough. So it's like, yeah, I'm a little amazed that I guess no one ever. I guess it's that, you know, with games dealing with historically famous battles like this, I think there's kind of a subconscious desire or within the player to almost want to try and play it out historically to begin with. And to, you know, I see a lot of people on forums talking about, you know, what is historically reasonable and what can we do in this game that's historically accurate, and there's all sorts of mods that try to make the game more historically accurate. So I think there's a desire, and I'm not saying that's bad, not at all, but I think there's a desire, or even subconsciously within players who are by nature into history, into the history of the battle, to kind of do things historically. And I think that kind of puts kind of a mental shackle on them in terms of thinking outside the box and thinking about, well, how could I accomplish this, you know, paying no attention to what happened historically, and just do what the scenario requires of me, you know, because what the scenario requires of you is very different from what the situation Napoleon faced in 1815. Napoleon had to think on a whole different level than just, oh, I have to get a certain amount of points to win. You know, he was thinking strategically. He had to defeat these allies. He had to knock Wellington back towards the sea. He had to defeat the Prussians. And knock them out of the war before the Austrians and the Russians could bring their armies to bear. Because once the Austrians and the Russians got in the game, then all you got is a repeat of the campaign of 1814. 4 nations arrayed against him, and he would have had no hope. You know, so it was really, it was live or die here for Napoleon. You know, at this battle, this was it. You know, he had no choice. He had to destroy Wellington here. None of that applies to me. None of that applies to us. There's no way to simulate that within the context of a tactical war game. When the scenario's over, it's over. I get up and I go out to the living room and I watch TV. That wasn't the case for Napoleon, of course, in 1815. So I don't have to think about any of that. All I have to do is get enough points to get a major victory, and I win. So there's nothing actually compelling me to engage the Allied army if I don't have to. And there's nothing in the scenario that compels me to engage them. Because once we take La Hassant, we have 100 point a minute source of points for the rest of the game. And for the rest of the time after that, we can focus on, setting up an absolutely ridiculous defense along the line of Place and Loire, and dealing with the Prussians, who I already know are scripted to attack, and they give it their best shot. Not gonna lie, it's for at least an hour or so there, they definitely give it their best shot. But against an army of the North that hasn't even been engaged yet, they're no match for it. So we've got some Allied cannon on the run here. You can see, there they go. One of their howitzers, and again, the Allied cannon is just no match for this ridiculous grand battery set up on the ridge here. I just can't believe how many guns the French army has here. It's just crazy. Like, more artillery than I would ever need in my life. Alright, so we're a little over half hour into the scenario, and I'm advancing Burgot's brigade out on the flank of Hougomont. I'm sorry, not Hougomont, La Hassant. You guys have already seen this in Counterland's attack. It's basically the same thing. La Hassant is unoccupied. Take 2 battalions, send them out on the right, and then just rush your way into the fort, and that's it. You have it. And then once the small little units in the Orchid realize they're getting shot at in the rear by the troops in the fort, they'll rise up and turn to face the troops in the fort, and then we can charge them with these other 2 battalions that we're sending forward to near the Orchid here. Now, this is a cheap strategy. I'm not, obviously, but I mean, even if I didn't use this strategy, these units in the Orchid are absolutely tiny. They would be no match even if I just sent a French brigade against them, headlong. It would still be the same result. I'd take more casualties, it'd be bloodier, but it would be the same result, and I would still get La Hassant. So even if you want to say, well, okay, you can't expect the scenario author to have thought of this, fine, I'll concede that. But I can expect that the scenario author should have thought that this objective is too lightly defended, and it's going to appear to be a very easy target for the French player at the very beginning of the battle. It's unoccupied. There's nothing but 3 tiny little detachments of KGL troops here. It's an obvious target, for anyone, thinking about winning and not necessarily, oh, no, I can't attack. I have to start on the left at Hougomont because that's where Napoleon started. So anybody not thinking that way is going to look at this and go, that is just an easy target to capture very quickly. Even if you don't do this. This is cheap. I admit this is cheap. That's what I do. I discover cheap stuff. But whether you're doing this or whether you just take, one of these brigades that advance headlong against the Orchid, the result is still going to be the same. You're still going to drive these tiny little units off and capture La Hassant. And because La Hassant is basically isolated from the rest of the Allied line, you're not moving close enough to any of these troops to actually activate them. Maybe the 95th Rifles in the sandpit there, but that's it. Other than that, you're not moving close enough to any of the Allied troops to activate them. you know, at least in the counterlance attack scenario, there was kind of a provision for what would happen if you if you actually captured La Hassant very quickly. Is that the Allied divisions back on the over here on this part of the ridge actually launched a counterattack. Obviously, that was scripted to happen, but at least there was some provision in the scenario for, well, what happens if the French player gets the fort really early? Oh, you know. Because even in that scenario, that's all you need to do. You just need to get La Hassant. You don't need to go and attack the Allied lines. Ultimately, that's a big kind of recurring theme with these battles in the center here at Waterloo, is that La Hassant is just worth too much, and it's too easy to get. You know, whether it's the La Hassant Brigade scenario, whether it's counter-lance attack, or whether it's the full Battle of Waterloo, this fort is just way too weakly defended and worth way too many points. So here we go. We're rushing 2 battalions of Brujot's brigade into the fort. It's unoccupied. These bozos are still laying down. We're not within their engaged distance, so they have no idea what's going on. By the time we are in their engaged distance, too late. We're in the fort. I think there was a 3rd unit back here that got ran off by artillery fire already. You can see the bodies on the ground. So there was a 3rd unit here that most likely already got routed. So these guys are finally starting to stand up, but we're already basically in the fort. There's nobody in the garden. There's nobody on the side of the fort. It's very early in the battle, before La Hassant was reinforced at all. La Hassant was not the first thing that was attacked in the battle. Obviously, the woods and Huguemont were. So at this point, you know, this early at noon, the farmhouse really hadn't been that heavily reinforced because it really hadn't been engaged at all yet. So okay, we have 2 units inside the farmhouse now who are going to begin shooting these guys. You can see a body has fallen already, shooting these guys in the flank, and very shortly they will realize that and turn to face these troops in the fort. There they go. These guys, unfortunately, are out of engaged distance. They've stood up, but they're not in musket range of the troops in the farm. But they're still a very they're still a very small unit. There'll be no match for battalions at these size. So these guys will take in the rear, and these guys are going to be hit more in the front. But it doesn't matter. This battalion is way, way bigger than that small little KGL detachment. So we have way more bayonets going into the charge than they do. Okay, so we're going to advance this column against this unit and this column against this unit. And as soon as we knock these guys out of the way, then of course I'll send the officer into the fort so we can occupy the objective. Now these guys here have no idea what's heading for them because they're facing the fort. They have their backs to us, so they have no idea we're even approaching. These guys do because we're kind of coming in on their left front. Nevertheless, they still have an open fire on us. Now we are engaged. and we're going to charge. These guys are like, oh my god, immediately run off. It's like, oh my god, feats don't fail me now. And we have charged into a headlong charge against these bozos, which we're winning handsomely. And they surrender. So now we'll send Bugeaud into the fort to occupy the objective. Taking some shots at these guys as they run off. They're actually not routed. They will reform. We'll go out and poke them again, and eventually they run off where they're far enough away that I don't care about them, and then they'll eventually get routed by our artillery. So there goes Bugeaud into the fort. And we now have the objective. You can see we've acquired our French flag on the icon there. So we now have the objective. So for the next 8.5 hours, we're going to be getting 100 points a minute. Simple math. Simple math. So before I can bring this battery up to set up on the flank of La St, we have to clear these bozos out of the way. So we're just gonna send this battalion out to hit them again, and we'll pause the battery. So here's the battery. We're just gonna halt them in place. Yeah. We'll just have them halt over here until we clear out this little group of skirmishers, this little KGL detachment, and once these guys are out of the way, we'll bring our guns up to set up on the flank, and we'll bring another battery up to set up on the flank, and bring a whole bunch of troops into the orchard so that La St will basically be impregnable. You bozos should really turn to face us, because you're about to get hit kind of right in the side here. And there they go. And our unit will automatically deploy into line and start shooting at them, but I really just want to move them out of the way and set up my little artillery fortress. So there they go, off they run, and they're going to run far enough away that they're no longer really an issue, and artillery will eventually rout them. So that's it, guys. That's the only combat you're going to see until the Prussians show up, because this one objective is enough to give us all the points we need for the next few hours, coupled with all the casualties we're going to inflict on our far superior artillery. Within like 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that, we're going to be over what we need. We're going to be over 30,000 points. So I'm bringing Charlet's brigade up on the right here, and I'm going to have a battery in front of them. And I'm bringing Hassan's brigade, which is a pretty good sized brigade, and I'm bringing them up behind the the artillery battery that we're going to bring up. And they'll basically be to reinforce the fortress as needed, and also as a source of troops to take over the troops occupying La Hassant as they take casualties. Because the Allies are bombarding La Hassant now that we have it, so the troops in there are only going to take casualties. They're not going to be giving out any casualties because they're not engaged in with anyone because there's nobody there. But the Allies will continue to bombard the fort, so they will eventually whittle the troops inside La Hassant down, and we'll have to send fresh units in, and that's what these troops are for. But the amount of casualties that the units take inside La Hassant it's not even remotely comparable to the amount of the amount of points that we're gaining per minute from being in La Hassant. So it's absolutely worth it to have troops in here taking casualties, because it's not comparable to the amount of points that we're getting for actually having the farmhouse. And if you guys have ever wondered what this is, the 13/50, 50 represents the radius of the objective. So 50 yards is basically just inside the fort. 13 represents the distance the leader is from the objective. So he's within the 50-yard radius, and he's considered to be 13 yards away from the very center of the objective. So he's within the radius, 13 yards away from it. That's all that means. And then the other thing is just the countdown for the timer. And we'll bring our division commander up just to keep all our higher officers kind of with their troops. Now, obviously, he only commands Charlet and Bergeaux's divisions, not Hussan, who is part of Bachelou's division of Rile's Corps. But there's really no command aspect of this game in terms of subordinate leaders being within range of higher leaders. It becomes more of an issue when you're using the courier system, solely because, if you're a division commander and you want to send an order to one of your brigade commanders and you're very far away, obviously it will take a longer period of time for the courier to reach the brigade commander. But there's no real penalty for a brigade being out of command from its division commander. None that I've ever detected anyway. So the fact that I have brigades from two different commands over here, kind of operating in the same area, doesn't really seem to have any effect on anything. So we have La Hassant now. We are racking up our 100 points a minute, and this is kind of a long haul strategy. I recognize that 100 points a minute it's a good amount of points per minute, but it's nothing insane. Really, the key here is that the battle is 9 hours long, and that's what I mean by a long haul strategy, because we know just by the simple math that we did that occupying that objective will give us the points we need over a long enough period of time, and we actually have that time. So there is a detachment of the Coldstream Guards there that has been run off by artillery bombardment. Like I said, the French artillery in this scenario is just spectacular. It's amazing what we're able to do just with artillery to the Allied lines. We really, over the course of 9 hours, put a hurting on it. Alright, so we've got both our artillery batteries set up on the flank of La Hasan. So, if the Allies were to do anything to try to approach it, which they don't, but, you know, if they were, it would be really, it would go badly for them. So now we can start assigning supply wagons to batteries. We have a lot of supply wagons, and you know, if possible, I always try to assign one supply wagon per battery, just to make resupplying just a quick zip back and forth. We already have one over here, as you can see, for this battery, and we're bringing another one up for this battery. And you guys know what I'm doing here. I'm just kicking out skirmishers, screen the guns. That's all, just in case the British come out here. I've never seen them do it, but you never know. Better safe than sorry. But no, they just lie there, taking a nice nap. Now down here, this is kind of a depression. You can see the ground kind of is higher here and then kind of slopes downwards towards La Hasan, kind of like this. You can see kind of the borders of where the slopes begin. So I'm placing a lot of these troops down in the slope there. So a lot of them are going to be really well protected from Allied artillery, because the Allied artillery can't really see them. And really the only battery that can is the battery behind La Hasan, and that's actually the battery we're trying to take out, so that they can't fire at La Hasan anymore and keep inflicting casualties on our troops inside. Now there are still some Allied troops in the woods, all the various detachments of troops under Colonel MacDonald. So I'm just sending skirmishers out in front of the batteries just to screen them in case some of those troops try to move out. You know, they never do, but you know, this is just stuff I always do regardless of the situation. It's just always good to have skirmishers screening the guns. They stop artillery from getting fired upon, and they don't block the artillery's line of sight in any way. So there's really no con to having them out there, only pros. Now I hear some canister fire going on. And this is the one surprising move the Allies actually made during the battle. And I missed it. I didn't see it, but it's actually a Dutch-Belgian skirmisher unit that has appeared on our right flank right here. Look at this. Yeah, now I see it. I'm like, what the hell? So let's go check this out. So yeah, there is a Dutch-Belgian unit that has actually made it and has caused some of my artillery to start moving off. Now none of these guns are routed, they're just pulling back. They have inflicted a couple of casualties on our guns, but nothing serious. And we're just going to deploy a bunch of skirmisher units to surround them and get them out of here. But, that was the one thing they did that was somewhat surprising. And we'll just set our battery. We'll just set our whole battery up right in. Yeah, so we only lost 7 artillerymen, no guns, no big deal. And like I said, we're just going to throw out some skirmishers to shoot them up. We'll put these guys kind of right here and kind of be shooting at them from two directions. And they will quickly give way. So I'm guessing these guys came from the units at Papilot, in the Papilot area, and they deployed a skirmisher unit and sent them out here. It's certainly not from that unit lying down there, I don't think. There are obviously a whole bunch of Dutch-Belgian units down in the ravine in here and in the woods here that, you know, we no longer can see because we pulled Jacquinot out and moved him back over here. So that's how they were able to sneak up on us. But no big deal. Our guns are deploying now, so we're going to start shooting them up. I believe we are in canister range, but not in musket range. We're outside of musket range. And you can hear the artillery opening up on the skirmishers. And it shouldn't take long to get them to run once that is the case. This gun here is out of ammo. That's the only reason it's falling back. And there they go. A couple of canister shots, off they run. Bye, fellas. Thanks for visiting. I had intended to refuse this part of the line anyway, so, you know, no big deal that we got an early start on that. And there they go, back to wherever they came from. And all right, guys, that is 12:30, exactly 1 hour into the battle. So basically, we started our redeployment of the army. We moved Ryle's Second Corps over from their position on the extreme left, and we sent Lobau to occupy the position around Plassenois. We haven't deployed them or anything. We just sent them over there, as well as the Young Guard to the extreme right of Plassenois with some cavalry backing them up. And we captured La Hassant, which is our source of points. Not too exciting, but it's more exciting compared to what the next few videos are going to be, where it's just more of the same. And we're basically just waiting for the Prussians. So yeah, the next part we will cover from 12:30 to 14:30. And that's it for now, guys. I will see you in the next part of the series. Take it easy.